Hello, my name is Dr. Magna Parks. I'm a licensed psychologist, and I've worked in the field for over 20 years. Over the past 3 or 4 years, however, I've changed my whole perspective on working with people with emotional disorders, and I'd like to share with you today some of the things that I have learned and some of the things that have been helpful as I've worked with people. We won't be talking about any particular emotional disorder today, but we'll be looking at the mind in general. Just want to tell you a little bit about myself as well. As I said, I've been in the field for 20 years. My husband and I recently started an organization called Be in Good Health, where we travel and speak and work with people individually, seeking to help them enhance their physical, spiritual, and mental health. So prayerfully, the information today will be one that you can utilize in your own life. And today we'll be talking about renewing your mind. Renewing your mind. The Bible tells us, "And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind." Oftentimes we think of that verse only in spiritual terms, but there are things that we can do to help this process of mind renewal. And I'd like to share some of that with you today. One of my favorite health educators wrote this over 100 years ago, the book Pathways to Health and Happiness, and I'd like to share with you some of what she says about the mind. She says, "It is the duty of every person for his own sake and for the sake of humanity to inform himself in regard to the laws of life and conscientiously to obey them. They, meaning us as individuals, should study the influence of the mind upon the body and of the body upon the mind and the laws by which they are governed." So she's telling us here that it is our duty to understand the laws that govern the mind and the body, because as one is affected, she tells us in another part of this book, the other sympathizes. So if we understand these laws, it will help us in this process of mind renewal. What I want you to get today, if nothing else you get, is that a healthy brain equals a healthy mind. You see a picture of a brain here. If we can keep that 2.5 to 3 pound organ in our heads, if we can keep that healthy, we can be almost assured that we will have a healthy mind. And I want you to keep that in mind as we move forward. Vital energy is imparted to the mind through what? The brain. And so if we can get that energy going to the brain, the mind will benefit from it. The health of the mind is to a large degree dependent upon the health of the body. And the health of the body is dependent upon the way in which the living machinery is treated. How many of you, if you were to try to get your car going, would take a gallon of gas and a gallon of water and put it into your gas tank? You wouldn't do that, would you? So many of us take so much better care of our cars than we do our bodies, which is what is referred to as the living machinery. We have to understand how to care for this living machinery as well as we care for our cars, and understand that as we care for this living machinery, it will have a great effect on the health of our minds. Let's look at some foods that help the mind. As you see up here, black-eyed peas, whole grains, soy in the form of tofu will help the mind. And we want to increase these foods if you want to have a healthier mind. We want to increase these foods. Black-eyed peas, I've mentioned before in another presentation, has tryptophan in it, which can help with the mood of your mind, help to calm your mood. And the same thing with soybeans, and whole grain breads are rich in nutrients. So we want to increase these foods. Other foods that are good: walnuts, Brazil nuts, almonds. In fact, I wanted to share with you some of why these foods are good. Let's talk a little bit about the Brazil nuts. This is a book that is one of the manuals that we use, Foods and Their Healing Power, written by a physician. And this physician sits on the board that determines the breakdown of foods. If you turn around cereal boxes or other foods that you have and they have the breakdown of what's in there, he sits on that board. So he's a pretty credible source. And in here, he talks about various foods and how they can help the various parts of our body. And I just wanted to share one thing with you. Brazil nuts, right here. Brazil nuts are rich in vitamins B1. And vitamin B1 is very important when we think about people suffering from nervous disorders and nervous symptoms such as irritability, depression, memory loss, even lack of concentration. So if you're having problems in any of these areas and you increase your consumption of Brazil nuts, you will find that you will see an improvement in these areas. So nuts are very good for the mind, and we need to eat them. Research shows that if we eat them at least 5 times a week, you'll see a benefit in them, in your mind. Avocados, lettuce. Do you know that if you eat a bowl of lettuce in the evening, that will actually calm you? And in this book, he talks about how lettuce can help you even with insomnia. And specifically, we're talking about, as we have here, the healthier lettuces. If you look at iceberg lettuce has very little nutrients in them. So we want to get lettuces such as romaine lettuce or green leaf lettuce. And those will help very much. They have a sedative effect on the mind. Then we have fruit. Fruit is always good for the mind because of the antioxidant effects and other things. So we want to increase these foods if we're talking about helping the mind. And there are other foods, but the basic principle I want you to remember is what God said in the very beginning. I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for meat. So when God gave us this in the very beginning, he knew it would affect our bodies and our minds. And so I want you to keep that principle in mind. And then we also hereby returning to the food provided for man by God in the beginning, the fruits and grains produced by the earth, man's mind is what? Made clear. So we want to keep that in mind as we're eating. How many of you have sat at the table recently and says, you know, I'm going to eat things that will help my mind and brain? I have to be honest with you, before I started learning this, that was the last thing on my mind. I ate because something was tasty to me. I didn't think about the effect on my body and mind. But I want after today, when you hear this, to start thinking about this. Will this clear my mind? Will this help my memory? And if you keep that in mind, you might make some different choices in your foods. There are also foods that hurt the mind. And one of the things that hurt the mind is sugar, especially white sugar. White sugar, if you know how it's made, when it's stripped, it's refined and stripped of all its nutrients, and one of the nutrients that it's often stripped of is the B vitamins, and B vitamins are very important for the nervous system. When I worked with my patients, when I was in private practice, my clients is what I really like to call them, I would often tell them we need to get off of the refined foods because you need as much B vitamins as you can get to be able to function properly. As you can see on our screen, sugar is absorbed quickly in the bloodstream, and it causes a rapid rise in blood sugar and then an equally rapid fall. And hours later, we experience feeling spaced out, weak, irritable, anxious, confused, difficulty focusing. Now, there's some controversy in the medical field about if there's really hard evidence as to how sugar affects you, but anecdotal evidence, you know, I've worked with people and in my own life, I can usually tell when I've eaten sugar because it kind of clouds my thinking. So even though the research might not show that, you need to experiment for yourself to see how sugar affects you. And that's one of the things you might want to stay away from if you're wanting to have a healthy mind. Also, the consumption of meat or fried foods leads to sluggishness, slow thinking, and fatigue, and we don't want that. We want our minds to not have a lot of sluggishness to it. We want it to work crisply and sharply. I wanted to read something to you about dementia, speaking of meat, which I thought was so interesting. You know, if you look at statistics today, dementia is really growing in the world and especially in the American population. I wanted to share something with you again from one of our handbooks, Foods and Their Healing Powers. Listen to this. It says, a study at Loma Linda University in California demonstrated that regular eaters of meat, including poultry and fish, which oftentimes is touted as the better meats, are at twice the risk of dementia as vegetarians. Did you hear what I said? Those who eat meat regularly are at twice the risk of dementia as vegetarians. So as we can see,